Hi everyone, and welcome back to Lesson 4 of the New York School of Design's Intro to Digital Design. My name is Vidal Saifali Valencia, and I'm a fashion designer here in New York City. Within these 15-minute videos, we aim for you to learn the procedures, methods, and techniques utilized by fashion designers within CAD software. Today's video, we're going to be talking more about Photoshop, and we're going to be revisiting some of the tools that we introduced back in Lesson 1, except for now we're going to show you how you can apply them more so to your own work, and how you can utilize these tools to make improvements to your sketches, or your illustrations, or any other files you take into Photoshop. And so previously, we spent more of our time in Illustrator looking at how to draw a technical flat and utilizing those tools. But if you're actually working from a more physical standpoint with hand sketches or hand illustrations, utilizing a tool like Photoshop is actually really ideal, as it allows you to make edits to your photos, to your sketches, to pretty much any image you bring into the software. And once you've brought it into the software, you can make changes to how it looks, the brightness, the contrast, and even change colors, you name it. So when we're talking about working within Photoshop, I'm going to be mostly referencing bringing in files either from Illustrator or from scans of sketches or different other types of files that you've brought into Photoshop. While it is possible to sketch or illustrate within Photoshop itself, I'm not necessarily going to go too in-depth on that today. However, just know that you can pretty much bring any file of your work, whether that be a Photoshop file, an Illustrator file, a hand sketch that's been scanned, and once you've brought that into the software, you can then make all of these same edits. So all of these tools kind of go across the board in terms of what they can do. And so we're just going to jump right in with the Layers tool, and you maybe remember me talking about layers in our previous episode about Illustrator, and the principle is pretty similar. Arrangement and layers are important aspects of both Photoshop and Illustrator. They just behave somewhat differently within each software. So the general purpose of utilizing layers is to keep aspects of your file separate. And so if you have a sketch that you've done and maybe an inspiration image and you have some text that you want to put on top, you don't necessarily want all of those things on one layer, because the more you work into a single layer, the harder it gets to edit things at that point. And so you can lose editing capability. It can make your file more complicated. It can make things in general harder to work with if you don't use layers. And so the purpose of layers is to just keep everything separate. And to just show you where you can find some information about layers is I have my Photoshop file open. You can see up here there's this drop-down menu of layers, and so this has most of the commands we'll be discussing today. As I've said in previous lessons, most everything in some capacity has a keyboard shortcut, so you may become familiar with this at some point, such as the new layer tool, or utilizing things for arrangement, or merging layers. And so if you see me do a quick if you see me click something and I'm now utilizing a different tool, it's more likely than not just a keyboard shortcut, but I will be doing my best to make sure I'm explaining everything as thoroughly as possible. Additionally, you can see there's a layer menu over here. If you're not seeing this for some reason, you can click over here at Window, and if this is unchecked, you can check this by clicking it, which will create this window over here. So in general, it's good to start by saying that in a Photoshop file, generally when you open it up, you'll start with what's called the background layer. And the background layer can be, well, anything can be made into a background layer eventually. However, if you're starting with a background layer, it's usually just going to be white to begin with. But if the background layer was not there, then you'll actually see this grid pattern on the back of your file. And what this is representing is actually transparency. And so if I were to save this whole file like this with no background, and I saved it as a file format that preserved transparency, which would be something like a PNG, you would then not have any background at all. And this can be really great down the line in terms of combining your files into one for a presentation or your portfolio, because you don't always want all the background aspects of your image or your sketch showing through. So you'll always generally start with a background layer, and that is really just so it's on a background. Otherwise, as I said, really the purpose for having layers is to keep everything separate. And when you add certain objects to your file, for instance, if you import an image, if you add text, it's going to usually create on its own a new layer for that object. However, you also need to know how to manually create a new layer, because if you were going to create a layer and you wanted to draw something or you wanted to add something yourself, you can go either up here to the drop-down menu, click New Layer, and that's going to create a new layer. It's going to ask you if you want to name it. It's going to ask you color, which I'll explain shortly, and then mode, which we're going to keep as normal for now. So we're just going to say OK. And over here in my window is now our new layer. So additionally, you can also create a layer by pressing this plus button down here, which will just automatically create a layer. So I'm going to just delete these real quick. And so over here with your layer menu, you can see there's some options over here. This is just a drop-down menu, which allows you to sort. As you saw, when I went to create a new layer from the drop-down menu up here, it asked me if I wanted to assign a color. This is just for organizational purposes. If I were to say this should be red, it's going to then bring up this little red color here. And if I was working on a complicated file, I could sort this by color and then by red, and that's going to just show me everything that has that label. This is kind of if you were working on a Mac computer. Generally, you can create tags and colors. It's kind of the same principle here. So this is just for sorting for the most part. Additionally, these are referred to as blend modes. We're going to learn more about them later. You have your opacity, which I'll get to shortly, and you have your locking mechanisms. So in order to work within your file, you sometimes want to hide some pieces of it, and you want to just focus on one area. So if I, for instance, didn't want to see all of these text layers that I have here for all of these little headers, I can just click this eye tool here, and it will hide all of them. It is not deleting them. It is just making them not visible. And so this is good because sometimes you don't want to show something, or if you're sketching on top of an image, or if you're doing some type of work within a file, you'll want to hide certain sections. And so you can just utilize this eye tool in order to toggle the visibility. Additionally, you can take different layers and you can modify their opacity. And so if you see my frowny face here, it's currently at 100%. If I click this here, it's going to just bring this little toolbar here, which I can utilize to lower, which is going to make the opacity lower. If I make the opacity 0, it's going to be completely see-through. But if you make it 100, it's going to be completely opaque. So we'll just lower it a little bit, something to like around 50-ish. So now you can see that it's, now you can see that it is more sheer. And additionally, just these two as an example for the purpose of layers is if I wanted to keep the face separate from the head of this little drawing, I would want to have those on different layers. Now, that means if I have selected the green face layer that I've created here and I just use our move tool, I can now move that separately. Now, if I wanted to do something similar to this frowny face, I'm not going to be able to just move the eyes and the mouth independently because this was all done on one layer. And so this is just an example of sort of the principle of keeping these things separate. Again, when you're working with layers, you will want to be cognizant of the visibility, you'll want to be cognizant of the background, and just making sure that you're either working separately within your layers or you're modifying multiple layers at one time. Now, if we say with this example, I wanted to move the face, but I want the head to stay where it is. So I could, for instance, take my layer that's called the face, and I can click lock on that layer. Now, if I do that, that means I can no longer do anything to that face. If I were to go to this layer for the head, though, I could move that a little bit and make it look how I wanted to. I guess I want something like that. And now, if I go back to this green face layer, I can't do anything to it. I can't draw on it. I can't erase it. I can't move it. And that's all because I've toggled the lock. Now, that's just important to remember because sometimes you'll want to make changes to certain sections of your file and not others, or you really want to preserve one section. And for safety, you want to be keeping things locked when you don't want anything to happen to them. Now, while it's important to be working with multiple layers or quite a few layers within Photoshop in order to make everything as editable as possible and to preserve the general editability of every aspect of your file, it can get overwhelming and it can feel like way too many things at once. This menu over here can get really, really full once you've added filters and layers and text and objects and shapes and images and all of these things. So there is actually an easy way to keep this organized, and that is you can either go up here and you can create a new group. So you go new group, or additionally, you can click this little folder button down here. And if I do that, it's going to create a folder within this menu. And let's say I wanted to move all of these text layers kind of into one spot so I don't have to see all 6 of them right there. I can name this folder text layers, and I can just drag each one of these layers into that folder. Additionally, I can click one and hold shift and select all of them and drag them into that folder. And if I click this little drop down again, it's going to hide everything within that folder, and now it's all together as one. And so this is just a really great way to keep things separate and more organized. Additionally, you'll want to merge layers sometimes, and you want to be careful with this because there are ways in which you can make accidental big changes to this. So we're going to start just by selecting all of our little face layers here, so the green face and this frowny face, and I'm just going to hold shift and I'm going to select all. And if you go up here to layer, you can scroll down here and do merge layers or merge visible. Merge visible is going to merge every visible layer in that menu. Now, If you have things with the eye toggled off, then it will not merge them. But you generally want to be careful in doing this, as it's going to really flatten your image. And then you're going to have, if you keep working and you can't undo anymore because there's a limit on the amount of undoing you can do, you might be in trouble because your file will be less editable now. So if I just want to merge these faces together, I'm just going to click Merge These Layers. And now they're one layer. Note that it did merge the layer with the modified opacity on this one, so any effects you've applied to a layer are going to be brought into the layer even if it's merged. And let's say we decide that we're tired of this layer altogether. We can just select that layer, go back up here to Layer, and we can just go to Delete Layer, and now it is gone. And so we just have our background layer and our text layer. And fundamentally, those are the basics of layers that you'll need to be aware of, and just remembering that they are super important as well as super useful to making functional, editable, and really useful files to modify your images. And so that, at a glance, is how to utilize the marquee tools, the selection tools, as well as layers in order to make sure you're bringing your files into Photoshop and to make edits to them that allow the files to work better within your portfolio or within a presentation. I've been in your shoes before, and I know that learning tools and softwares like Photoshop and Illustrator can be a lot of information at once, but I just always say practice makes perfect. Just got to keep practicing and really familiarizing yourself with the software, as once you get used to where things are, how they work, and sort of the interactions between these tools, I'm sure you'll be fluent in no time. So again, just keep practicing. I encourage you to play around within the softwares to learn some more, and I will see you in the next video. Talk to you then.